course, there's going to be monumental architecture, and because of changes in disposable income, obviously an increase in disposable income because of changes in transportation, the rail system, what you have is people really traveling. And traveling in numbers that we haven't seen really in human history. Although I should point out there was plenty of tourism going on in ancient Rome. We see tourism in medieval Europe in the form of pilgrimage. So it did happen, but it's going to happen far more in this period. The result is we're going to see the development of, for example, permanent museums, and we're going to see the construction of commemorative monuments. Now, oftentimes, these monuments will take advantage of modern construction techniques, so they go up much faster than their ancient predecessors, but they do tend to use earlier styles, and that's usually symbolic. So, for example, when we look at the Victor Emmanuel Memorial in Rome, you see very strong Roman influence, and that makes a lot of sense because they had just unified Italy, and so he wants to draw parallels to ancient Rome, the idea that Italy will stand as a republic for 1,000 years, or however he wants to nuance that, but that's basically the idea behind it. And you don't put a monument like that in the middle of Rome without an eye towards a lot of the ancient pieces. For example, if you look in the background, you can actually see the Colosseum here. So you have to bring in that influence to some degree, but there's always a sense of propaganda and a sense of monumentality that goes into these pieces. Then we have, for example, the Lincoln Memorial, which is drawing more from the Greeks, of course, that idea of democracy, and focusing on sort of a modified Greek temple form with the Doric columns, the use of metopes, the use of a frieze of some form, and then that cella wall with the colonnade running around is primarily Greek, but of course, again, it's been modified, and the symbolism here is looking at democracy, that Greek ideal that we are told comes into the United States, again, acting as architectural propaganda, messaging the general public. And then we see pieces like the Statue of Liberty here under construction in Paris, which is using these new materials, primarily steel, in its superstructure, the structure underneath, to create a relatively large and lightweight sculpture where the copper over the top, and here we see it before it turns green, is only a couple of pennies thick. It could never support itself, but we have that incredible steel architecture based on Eiffel's Tower in Paris at the time. And again, when we look at her, she has that Roman or Greek feel, and I would argue it's more of a classical feel, mixing the ideas, the use of contrapposto, the use of the crown, this sort of laurel wreath, except it's using rays, the use of fire as a symbol, which is used by both the Greeks and the Romans. So again, both propaganda and messaging. Now, factory design will take an interesting twist. Up until this point, factories are generally shapeless, rectilinear forms. They just sort of sprawl out. Think your latest Amazon warehouse or large warehouse distribution center that you see. But in Germany, we see a designer by the name of Peter Behrens, who creates this factory for AEG, a Berlin electrical company. And what he does is he's adding an aesthetic value, the idea, very arts and crafts sort of idea, that by adding aesthetic value to someone's life, you increase their happiness and thus their productivity. And here, what he's done is create a massive form with these huge concrete corners and columns, and then opened up the space with huge walls of light because he's using steel as a major support beam, as a major support in the factory. What this does is it brings in a lot of natural light. It brings in The theory being that it's going to bring people happiness, and he's getting this idea from Gothic cathedrals. So he is looking back, but he's modernizing. He's just taking an idea, whereas Gothic cathedrals, of course, were made up of columns and then walls of glass. He's taking it to the next level because, of course, he has new materials such as steel to work with. We'll also see changes in skyscraper design, especially when we're moving from iron construction to primarily steel construction. Steel allows for different elements and different forces in the skyscraper. It also allows for a lighter structure, which allows for more glass, more windows, things that become more familiar. And while we will on occasion see the tripart design that we've seen before, we're often going to move towards more vertical design, as we see in Louis Sullivan's Wainwright building, where the vertical lines are something that you can't get away from here. There's not a lot of horizontal. The design from Greek and Roman columns is still present. For example, we still have what appears to be a capital, a shaft, and a base. So it's still there, but the verticality is coming out more than the horizontal nature. He's also going to decorate many of his buildings, including this one, in this case with an Art Nouveau form. So we have this curvilinear acanthus form, very oak-like acanthus form. We have the use of the circles above, the circular forms here, and those are all giving a sense of juxtaposition, sort of softening what's going on in the building below, which of course is primarily rectilinear. So we see that interesting mix. Here we see what could be arts and crafts mixing in with ideas from Art Nouveau as well as from the classical world.